This is the story I call Boys Will Be. We were two teenage boys sitting on a narrow ledge high above the valley floor of Yosemite with no way down. Let me go back. When I was a junior in high school, 16 years old, we had a foreign exchange student from Finland by the name of Johann attending our school, and Johann and I became friends. I decided to show Johann some of California that I love the most, including Yosemite Valley. And I picked Yosemite in part because I knew that Finland was a relatively flat country, and I thought Yosemite would just really blow his mind. And sure enough, it did. We packed up my mom's imported station wagon with car camping gear, and we headed off to Yosemite Valley for the weekend. Along the way in my packing, I pinched a pint bottle of tequila, a souvenir bottle of tequila that my dad had bought in Tijuana, Mexico. This particular old brand actually contained the agave worm, dead, pickled, floating in the bottom of the tequila bottle. Anyhow, I thought that might be kind of fun for Johann and I around a campfire, depending on how the camping went. When we got to Yosemite Valley and the walls of Yosemite and the whole scene, sure enough, it blew his mind. We drove down into the valley, we camped, we set up camp, and I had planned on taking us to the favorite hikes that I've always enjoyed, like the waterfall hikes and that kind of thing. But Johann was just giddy. He was like, "Tim, we need to go over and find a way to climb our way up those walls, climb our way out of Yosemite Valley." And I'm like, "Johann, you have no idea. No idea what you're talking about." He's like, "I'm sure we can do it." Anyhow, so we headed off, bushwhacking our way from our camp over to the nearest point of meeting the Yosemite Wall. When we got over there, sure enough, Johann looks at this, and it's sheer granite wall, about 1,000 feet tall, and there was no way. And I thought, okay, he's going to say, "Okay, I get it. Now let's go on and do whatever you want to do." He's like, "No, there's got to be a way. Let's hike along the wall until we find a way to climb." And I'm like, "Okay, let's do that." So we're walking along the wall, and there's the valley trees, pine trees that are kind of thick in there. Amazingly, we get to a point along the wall where, sure enough, there was a strange aberration. There were these two massive plates of granite that made up the wall that were sections that were almost touching, but there was a gap, about a 4-foot gap in between these two plates that made this large crack that went up a huge distance straight up. And Johann said, "This is it. This is how we will climb the walls." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And not only did I not understand what he was thinking, but this was the extent of our gear. We had T-shirts, we had Levi blue jeans, and we had tennis shoes. And that's what we were going to use to climb. But Johann was already, he just literally climbed in the crack, his back against one side, and his feet, tennis shoe clad feet on the other side. And sure enough, he started kind of shimmying up with his back, and then he would walk up a couple of steps with his feet, shimmy up some more, step a couple more steps up, and he started just moving up. It was almost like an elevator shaft, and he was the elevator car. And I thought, well, what do I know? So I got in after him. And, we were both young, athletic, strong, healthy, teenage guys. And it actually was relatively easy to do. You get in this crack and you start just kind of moving forward up on the back, up on the feet, up on the back, up on the feet. And sure enough, within a few minutes, we were at the height of the tops of the trees of the valley, these pine trees that are really tall. And then we're higher, and we're still going up. Johann is literally right above me, and at one point, we're way up. And he says, "Tim, we got a problem." And I'm like, "What?" And he says, "Well, there's a boulder. There's a huge boulder stuck in the crack." I guess we didn't really pay attention when we were looking up, but I kind of look up and I have to look around or whatever. Johann, his body's right above me. Sure enough, there's this large boulder that's completely stuck in the crack and it's blocking the crack. We cannot go past it. And so I think, okay, it's game over. We're going to have to just go back down, the crack, this so-called elevator shaft and do something else. And Johann is like not going to give up. And so he gets up to the boulder and he starts kind of feeling around it with his arms and hands. And sure enough, he starts kind of, getting a better grip and kind of wedging one of his hands up against the boulder. And then before you know it, he's got himself where he can carry his weight with his arms. And so he kind of drops his feet away that are just dangling in the air, and he pulls himself up on top of the boulder. It was amazing. And so I'm like, I guess I got to start moving forward. And so I should stop at this point because some of you might be thinking appropriately, what the hell is wrong with you? This young man, what happened to your sense of self-preservation? Well, I'd like to say that I was the host for Johann being in Yosemite, and I owed him, right? It was a duty to not just let him go, and I should go with. I should kind of be there with him. Well, the honest answer is probably twofold. On one hand, being a healthy young teenage male, I was suffering from the age-old chronic thing of testosterone toxicity, and so that was kind of pushing me on one side. The other was how young men are raised in this culture. Probably since the dawn of time, there was this echo in the back of my mind that having heard boys say to me or other boys forever, right, when facing something scary, chicken, don't be a chicken, right? And that's also that. So that was prodding from one side, whereas the testosterone is pulling. The testosterone side of it was about fueling the adolescent male ego. What? Johann doesn't have any bigger muscles than I do, and I've got long arms, and I can do anything he can do, and I'm not going to let him show me up. And then there's the don't be a chicken. Anyhow, I start doing the same thing, and I start getting my hands around this boulder, and sure enough, before you know it, I'm realizing that my grip will hold, hopefully, and I let go of my footholds and foot grip and just let my legs dangle in the empty space, and I pull myself up. Johann and I are standing on top of the boulder, and Johann's already been scouting the crack as it goes up from there. And we both notice that the crack now it's gradually getting narrower, and now we're also more inclined to look further up to see if there's any more obstacles. And sure enough, there was. Quite a ways up, there was another obstacle, it was different. This was an old, gnarly tree, like a pine tree of some type, but an old, gnarly tree that was growing out of the crack perpendicularly. It wasn't a big tree, but it had a pretty decent trunk on it. And so we thought, okay, well, the crack is getting narrow. We can't actually now continue to climb in the crack. We're going to need to kind of wedge ourselves, but we get up to the tree, and that looks like it's doable to get around on top of this tree trunk sticking out of the thing. So Johann goes up, and I go up, and we're just, figuring it out. We're climbing, higher and higher and higher. We get to the tree. Johann climbs up and on top of the tree first, and he says down to me, "There's a ledge, Tim. There's a ledge. Get up here." So I climb, I follow him up, I get up the ledge. There's a ledge that's about 3 feet wide. And then on the other side, right, towards the cliff, there's kind of an area of large broken granite boulders that must have broken off from the cliff further up, that is over millennia has fallen down. And then the cliff continues on the other side of these, piles of broken boulders. And Johann says, "Tim, you wait here. I'll go check it out for us, and I'll come back." So Johann, after a while, comes back and he says, "Tim, there's just no hope, no hope." He says the wall above the boulders is just a sheer wall. There's nothing. No hand grip, no nothing. In fact, it's even angling. It almost feels like it's angling out a little bit. So it's just not going to happen. So he says, we're kind of like, what do we do? What do we do? This ledge that we're standing on, we notice that it continues out and around the other plate that made up kind of half of the elevator shaft crack from below. But it curves, and so we can't see beyond the curve as to whether this ledge continues. Maybe, right? If we took this ledge, there might be another way around the bend. And so we thought, okay, let's kind of just sidestep along this 2 or 3 foot ledge way up on the cliff. So we're, kind of just sidestepping, Johann first, me following along this ledge. We get out about 10, 12 feet to the point where it's curved a bit, and we can kind of see forward. Johann can see forward. And he says back, "Tim, no hope, done." The ledge actually peters off to nothing, and we can't continue to go that way. And so we're like, well, we're stuck. And so at about this time, I look down and I notice that on this ledge, there's a pack of cigarettes, and there's a book of matches stuck in the cellophane of the cigarettes. We can't go forward. We don't do nothing. We got to do so. We thought, well, let's take a break, and so we sit down on this ledge, with our backs up against the wall that's continuing up, and our tennis shoe coated feet hanging off the ledge over oblivion. And we light up cigarettes. I'm not a smoker. I don't know that Johann was a smoker either, but you got cigarettes, and it just seemed like, well, whatever. And so we're play acting as if we're cool, and we're smoking cigarettes, and I'm looking out over the view, and it's an awesome view. We are way, way above the treetops that look so far below us in the valley floor. We're at a point where birds are flying by at the level where we are. It's just, it's beautiful, and it's awe-inspiring, and it's like, oh my God, we're high. And as I'm, kind of smoking a cigarette, I'm realizing that we are out of options, and so the only the only thing we can do really is to think about getting down. And as I think about it, I'm thinking that I can actually probably work my way down the crack. But I know for sure that I can't go backwards down over that boulder where you can't see where to grab onto anything as you're kind of letting yourself down on the outside of that boulder. It will not work at all. And so I'm now I got a rising sense of panic that's beginning. And so while this is happening, I start hearing some rustling and scraping and something over by the tree, which is off to my right, about, I don't know, 12 feet away. And the next thing I see is a large hairy arm comes over the trunk, and a heavily bearded man pulls himself up onto the trunk of this tree. And he's got a rope across his chest, and he's got other climbing stuff, pitons, whatever, carabiners wrapped, on his waist band. And he, he's a big guy. He's struggling to get himself up and on top of the tree, and he gets himself set. He doesn't see us. And he's focused very much on what's below him. And so he's yelling instructions. Obviously, he's the lead of a climbing group that are coming up this same route. Only they've got all the equipment. They're real climbers. And so this guy is, giving instructions, and he's getting set, and he's letting rope down, and he's doing all these things. And I don't know what happened, but I'm over here, and I'm just kind of, smoking my cigarette, and it must have been out of his peripheral vision that he caught sight, and he damn near lost his balance. He looks over, and his eyes got huge, and he's, what are you guys doing up here? And we just thought we'd go climbing. And I wish I could have seen a thought bubble over his head, because he was a bit dumbfounded. And to see these two teenage boys in t-shirts and blue jeans and tennis shirts and tennis shoes, and smoking cigarettes on a cliff, way off the valley floor. Anyhow, so I don't think he didn't know what to do. And so at that point, my panic, kind of is like, aha. So I said, sir, it turns out we have a problem. We can't get down. Could we use your rope? And the look on this guy's face was like, oh, you've got to be kidding me. Thankfully, I think that I wish I could have met that guy again to thank him, but he was like, sure, whatever, why not? And so he yells down to his party, get yourself secured off the rope. We got a couple of guys who are going to be coming down using our rope. So sure enough, now we didn't have any rappelling equipment, to say nothing of the fact that we didn't know how to rappel, but seen pictures of it. So I get out there, and it's one of these pretty heavy diameter professional climbing ropes. So I grab on with my bare hands, and I just start kind of leaning out, walking backwards down the cliff, and that actually didn't seem to be too hard, and I wasn't too concerned about losing my grip because I was so frickin' scared. Anyhow, I'm passing then the fellow climbers of the lead guy, and they're all looking at us like, what? As they see these two teenage boys coming all the way down. Anyhow, we passed over the boulder. It was no problem with a rope. Great. Ultimately, we get all the way down. At the bottom, I had this incredible sense of elation. We walked back to camp. Later that night, we had I tried to make a great camp dinner for Saturday night, and I thought now we got a reason to celebrate. And so after dinner, I brought out my pinched pint of rot gut tequila that of my dad's, and I explained the tradition that my dad had told me about when he was a young guy growing up in San Francisco, that he and his friends would go out to the beach in San Francisco with tequila just like this, with a worm in the bottom. And the game was around a bonfire. You'd pass the bottle around. Everybody's taking a swig, and then when it got down to one gulp, one swig left in the bottle, whoever's turn that was had to take the worm with it. That was the game. And so I tell this to Johann. I said, "What do you think? Are you game?" And Johann says, "Well, yeah, why not?" So over our campfire, we're handing this thing back and forth and back and forth. And as it's going, and as we're getting toward the bottom of the tequila, it's occurring to me that, you know, odds are, just measuring it out, it's gonna be Johann's having the last gulp, and I can't do that. So I said, Johann, I just can't do this. So I said, look, get the worm out of there. We'll cut the worm in half. That's what friends do, right? Each taking half. I got cups, and I poured the last swig in, split it between two cups. I put half the worm in each one, and I had a little 7-Up, a little, maybe that would make it a little more palatable. And so then I gave Johann a cup and me a cup, and I said, Johann, okay, what a day. And I closed my eyes. And I must have opened up my throat so fully that I don't think any liquid even touched the back of the sides of my throat. Just boom, put the whole thing down. And I open up my eyes, and here's Johann across the fire. I'm like, Johann, for God's sakes, swallow that thing. Anyhow, boys, the crucible that produces men, it's an amazing process. Thank you very much.